there's that. And then got that up and going. I see Kyle's already in there watching with us. Hi, Kyle. And then for those of you who are starting to join us live, I see a few people on Facebook. We will get started in just a few minutes. Want to let people have the opportunity to get on board and be here for the presentation.
Figure we can give it till about 5 after again, like we did last time, and people can filter in.
I guess I will start the introduction now that it is 5:05. My name is Ian. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the program manager at Affirmations Community Center. This is going to be part of our online little financial series that we're doing. We 2 days ago did a presentation about personal finance and budgeting. You can find that in our Facebook feed. But this is going to be our second of the presentations, and we have Ian also joining us once again from Michigan State University Federal Credit Union. Ian has been a great support to Affirmations as well as Michigan State University Credit Union through our youth program, big involvement. We definitely love working with them. The partnership is spectacular. So we wanted to give Ian the opportunity today to talk a little bit about identity theft protection during COVID-19, what to watch out for, how to keep your identity safe. So I will turn it over to him.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone. So I am a financial educator for MSU Federal Credit Union. We also operate as Oakland University Credit Union with the Oakland University community. So today we're going to talk a little bit specifically about identity theft prevention. Some of it will be general, that applies in all cases, and then I'll really highlight some things that have happened since this COVID-19 pandemic and kind of what you can do to prevent yourself from falling victim to that. I've seen some kind of startling statistics about how much money has already been stolen from people during this circumstance, and it's unfortunate to see that. So we'll talk through some of that. That being said, if there are additional financial topics that you would like covered in a future seminar, please touch base with Affirmations, specifically Ian Unger. He is the one coordinating these programs with me, and we'd be happy to do some additional topics that are of interest to you, anything financial related that you might have some questions about. Without further ado, I'll kind of launch in here and get started with what we're going to talk about today. So I like to start by distinguishing a little bit between fraud and identity theft. So fraud is kind of like the umbrella term that covers any time that someone is deceiving someone else to gain some sort of advantage using somebody else's information in some format or another. So fraud, you think about fraud, that could be something like a charge showing up on your credit card that wasn't yours, that you unfortunately have to dispute. It's not necessarily ideal, but you're able to dispute it and in most cases get your money back. So it's an inconvenience, but not necessarily devastating. Identity theft is a little bit more severe and involves somebody obtaining information that goes to a deeper level about who you are, and then using that information in order to open accounts in your name, apply for services in your name, perhaps get jobs in your name and avoid paying taxes that you end up responsible for and things of that nature. So it's a little bit more severe and can sometimes result in a little bit of additional work in order to kind of deal with and handle. So interesting fact about identity theft is that over half of all identity theft victims actually personally know the thief. The reason for that? Probably because the people around us are the people we're most likely to trust. They're the people that have the easiest access to that information. And our guard tends to be down with people that we know. So for example, if I leave my social security card on my dining table and there are other friends of people that I know that come over, etc., who are seeing that information, they personally know me, I tend to trust them because I know who they are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe to leave that important information accessible to just anyone. So the things that a thief really wants to obtain is, number one, your social security number. That's the gold standard for all identity theft. Once they have that information, it's a lot easier to get the rest. So that's the one you want to safeguard the most. Other things might be your credit union or bank account numbers, your credit card numbers, or even just personal identifying information that can help with impersonating you. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. So regarding social security number specifically, it's important to really safeguard that information. So first thing, know where you need to provide it. So it makes sense for me to have to provide that information at a doctor's office where I may be connecting that with my insurance. It makes sense if I'm applying for a job that's going to be issuing me a paycheck and collecting taxes. It makes sense if I'm going to be opening a new credit card or a new financial account. They're going to need my social security number in order to be able to provide me with the service that I'm requesting. Where it doesn't necessarily make sense is if I'm doing a cash job for someone that I found online via maybe Craigslist, for example. It doesn't really make sense that they're going to need my social security number because they're probably not processing payroll and all of that. If someone's asking for that information over the phone related to a purchase that I made online, it doesn't make sense that they're going to need my social security number. So just kind of know where it makes sense. Think about, does it make sense that they would need this information? You can always say no to providing it. If you're ever asked to provide it and you say no, you're entitled to say no. It's obviously, it could prevent you from getting access to a certain service that you're requesting by not providing it, but you do always have the ability to say no, or at the very least, if it doesn't make sense, ask questions. What do they need the social security number for? What is it going to be used for, etc. My baseline is I never provide a social security number if they contact me. I will only provide it if I have contacted a source that I deem to be trustworthy and viable, and it makes sense for me to give them that information based on what I'm asking of them. And then lastly, keep the card in a safe place. It's never a good idea to carry a social security card around in your wallet or in your bag. That just promotes the opportunity for you to potentially misplace it, for somebody to be able to access it or view it. And so the best place to keep your card is locked up at home. And the only time you should need it is if something that you're requesting specifically requires that you have a physical card in person in order to provide that. Other than that, if you can memorize the number and leave the card locked up, that's the best case scenario. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about who is most at risk. So this is not comprehensive, but these are some groups that are largely targeted. One of the big ones are youth. Youth are often targeted, especially because they don't necessarily have a credit score established. And so that social security number would theoretically be wide open for somebody to use if they had access to that information, and perhaps they have poor credit themselves. And so they could use a child's social security number to gain access to certain services. I've seen this in the case of family members or someone who gets access to that opening a credit card or loan in the child's name without the child even knowing until they go to apply for their first thing that requires credit. Another example I've seen is it being used for, again, by a family member or someone who accesses it for the purpose of maybe signing up for internet or signing up for cable, something that requires a credit check that the person knows themselves they might not be able to pay. So once they open that or get approved for the service, they may continue to pay that just fine, but that doesn't necessarily help the person whose information is being used. And if anything ever goes sour, if any payments get missed, that can damage the credit history of whoever social security number is being used. Another group that's largely targeted are the elderly. And this is for a number of reasons. A lot of times the elderly are more likely to have a positive credit history because they've had their lives to build that history. So there's a lot of positive history on there. Another major reason is that the elderly tend to be a little bit more trusting. They may have underlying, confusion issues in some cases. Again, this is not comprehensive, it's not broad, but there's a higher likelihood that if grandma or grandpa gets a call asking for money with a sob story about why, that they're more likely to believe that and be willing to offer that information up. I can tell you that myself personally, my grandpa has been targeted multiple times and in some cases has given up money, unfortunately, because he trusted something that someone was telling him. Another group, high earners, and this is not always the case, but when someone is clearly a high earner, that makes them kind of a gold mine for someone if they're able to access that information, because there's a likelihood of a lot more money being available if they are able to get access. And also there's a lot more assets and things like that to kind of take into account. And then the fourth one we'll talk about here are social media users, which probably is most of you, especially those of you who are viewing this on Facebook. And we'll talk about why that is. But we share so much information so freely on social media in a form that's never really been available in the scale that it is now. The things that we're willing to talk about and share and tell people are oftentimes information that can make us vulnerable to identity theft as well. And we'll talk about what that means. So one example of kind of how the identity theft process happens is through what's called a synthetic identity. So it starts out where a fraudster, they find either an unused or a social security number that has only positive history. They use that information to then become an authorized user. So what that means is somebody else that they know has a credit card, and they say, hey, can I be an authorized user on that? I know you, I'll pay you for whatever I buy with it, but I just need to build some credit history. So someone they know can make them an authorized user without requiring a credit check, because being an authorized user doesn't make you legally responsible for the payments. But what it does do is it starts to report that loan or credit card or account on your credit history under that social security number that they're using. So they become that authorized user. After a period of 3 to 6 months, there will typically be a credit score associated, even if it was, so if this was a completely blank credit history, they become an authorized user. After about 3 to 6 months of history, now there's a credit score that's going to be reflected in combination with that social security number. Now that they have a credit score, they have this social security number, then they can go out and they can apply for accounts, loans, and things like that, and are more likely to start getting approved because it appears that they have some sort of credit history established and the identity seems a little bit more legitimate. And then this results in the identity being stolen, which, as this photo shows, makes us all sad. So it's not a great situation, but just kind of walks through kind of how that process tends to work. So some common scams that people are targeted with, especially college students or parents of college students, are scholarship scams. So scholarship scams come in the form of calls or emails informing someone that congratulations, you've been awarded such and such scholarship in this dollar amount. We just need some information in order to be able to finalize your scholarship. So if you have not applied for a scholarship or it doesn't make sense, be very careful about clicking on links in an email from this or providing information electronically or over the phone that is your personal information related to this scholarship. If it doesn't seem to make sense, ask questions, get as much information as you can, and then touch base with the financial aid department at any school that you might be considering to see if this seems legitimate, if there's more information that's needed. Another example may be a job offer, and this comes in the form of, we see this a lot on Craigslist, but it may be even more now by email, given the record numbers of unemployment we're experiencing. So job offers saying, hey, we're gonna offer you this job, we'll pay you this much, just provide us some information and we'll get stuff processed for you and get you started. In that case, they may just be asking for information, or we've even seen with Craigslist scams where someone is hired to do a job such as cleaning someone's house, and they send them a check, but they send them a check that's a paycheck that's too large for what they originally said they were going to pay. So now this person, the employee, has a check for too much money. The so-called employer will then say, oops, we didn't mean to send you too much. Use a few $100s for supplies you're going to need for the job. Keep the amount that we discussed as your paycheck, and then send the rest back to us. And here's how you can send it back. And typically it's going to be some sort of electronic payment method, or I've even seen it in the form of iTunes gift cards mailed back to a certain address. So some of you might think that's already a red flag, but I've unfortunately seen it happen a lot of times to people who are vulnerable, who've gotten taken advantage of because even though it seems too good to be true, the money's there right now. And the problem is you cash the check, you send them some money, and then a few days later, that check comes back as a bad check, and you're stuck owing whatever money you've already spent, whatever money you spent on supplies, and whatever money that you sent back to the thief. A couple other examples are winners. So we see these a lot. Congratulations, you won XYZ dollars, you won a vacation somewhere. These come as phone calls, emails, etc. If you have not submitted for a particular contest, you cannot win. I would love to win the lottery without having to buy a lottery ticket, but that doesn't ever happen. And then lastly, pre-approvals. So pre-approval offers, if they're coming by email or over the phone, always be skeptical of those. And then with pre-approvals that come in the mail, we'll talk a little bit about mail fraud, but it's important to make sure that you're not just throwing those in the trash, because those can actually end up being used by identity thieves or fraudsters to open things in your name. We'll talk about that in a second here. All right, so that leads right into some of the scams related to mail specifically. So the first one we'll talk about is dumpster diving. So that's, like I just talked about, not throwing away sensitive information. Dumpster diving happens when someone goes into the trash and they're looking for any personal financial information about anyone who may have unwittingly thrown it away. That could be credit card statements, account statements, pre-approval offers. It could be medical information. It could be information from the post office. Anything that might have sensitive information, it's really important not to throw that away, because somebody could go in and get that. They could steal those items, they could open things in your name. And so it's really important not to throw that stuff away. On the flip side, before you even ever get the mail, there's sometimes fraud where people will steal things out of the mailbox before it ever gets to you. So the best thing to do in that regard is just check your mail frequently. Don't let things just sit, unless, of course, you have maybe a locking mailbox that could provide some protection. And if you're going to be traveling, you can actually contact the post office and put up to 2-week hold on your mail, and they will hold it there for you at the post office. And when you return, you can go to the post office, pick up your mail, and remove that freeze. And it's completely free to do that. So that provides you a little bit of protection in the event that you're going to be gone and someone isn't able to come over and get your mail for you. And then with pre-approvals, if you're throwing those away or they're taking them out of your mailbox, even though it doesn't necessarily have all of your information filled in, if an identity thief is persistent, they're able to get enough information to submit that pre-approval. In most cases, they'll change the address for where the final credit card or loan funds would be sent. And then you're none the wiser until you see it show up on a credit report or you get called because the payments are past due on it. So it's always a good idea. For me personally, with pre-approvals, any piece of mail that I get that has my name on it, I open it and I make sure that there's not already an active credit card in there, because that might happen by mistake. And I want to know if there's something in there that's been opened in my name that came to me. And number two, just knowing, okay, this is sensitive information. I'm going to throw this into my shred pile and make sure it gets destroyed before I dispose of it. There's a lot of card scams related to cards, so credit and debit cards. So this comes in the form of in a number of forms. The first one we'll talk about is shoulder surfing, where somebody is looking over your shoulder as you enter your 4-digit PIN at an ATM or at a store terminal. Or I even like to expand this to describe if you're at a financial institution verbally giving information and somebody is staying within earshot so that they can hear and record that information. So you always want to be conscious when you're providing secure information, who is around, who may be listening, and how you're providing that information so that other people are not able to get access to that. Card sales. So this one I've seen somewhat of a decrease in, but it still happens where particularly at cash advance or check cashing stores, where someone will wait in the parking lot and then offer to buy a debit card from someone who's coming out of the store or going into the store. And they may offer to buy their existing debit card or ask them to go somewhere and open a new account and then say that they'll pay them for that debit card. And typically they'll say, oh, don't worry, you know, I'll make a few charges with it, but you can just dispute and say it was fraud and you'll get your money back. The problem is they're always going to ask for a PIN. And once they have access to that 4-digit PIN, they actually have the ability to do a whole host of things like depositing fraudulent things at ATMs, withdrawing money each day using that PIN, and you're not actually able to dispute anything that happens using your PIN. You are liable for that because it is your personal number. So it's never a good idea to sell your cards, never a good idea to trust somebody else with your PIN, period. And then lastly, skimming. And I'll show you a couple examples of that, but skimming is one of the most common card scams where somebody is essentially, they put a device somewhere that you're going to use your card. And when you use your card, it actually swipes the information off of that card, including the card number, the expiration date, the security code, and in some cases, they even get your billing address, because we all know when you shop online, you've got to enter in your billing address. So that information is also encoded on the card strip as well. So here's an example I'm going to show of a card scam in the form of a skimmer. So I'm just going to kind of narrate what's going on. I don't like to use the sound with this one. So I'll just kind of explain what's going on. So you can see this guy here is at a relatively public area. I believe it's somewhere in Europe based on the architecture. He's just in a wide open square that you think would be probably a pretty safe place to use an ATM. So he comes over to the ATMs over here and he's kind of inspecting it, looking at it. Everything seems okay, but he looks a little bit closer and notices some glue on the side. And that doesn't seem right for an ATM. Most ATMs are not going to be held together by glue. And if they are, you shouldn't use them. So he goes ahead and he jiggles it a little bit because something doesn't seem right. And he pulls it right off. Looks exactly the same as what's underneath. So no one would be the wiser unless they looked closely. He scares the woman next to him by making sure that that's not a skimmer as well. But here you can see, let me go back there. I'm gonna pause it right on the section where you can actually see the skimmer device. So right there, you can actually see this section, the little black chip, it looks like on the edge. And that is the device that is actually recording and storing information for every card that is inserted into that ATM. So we tend to think, okay, well, we've got chip cards. Those are more secure. And there is some added security. But if you're still putting your card fully into an ATM, which most ATMs require, there's still a potential for that information to be swiped by a skimmer. And what's more, this skimming device, although found by this gentleman, is actually, a lot of these are able to transmit the data that they record via Bluetooth. And so the thieves, the scammers, they don't ever actually have to come back and retrieve the physical skimmer. They just basically let it scan until it's found. And whatever information they get in that time. So it's just, and I'll talk about some things you can do to prevent this, or at least to mitigate the impact of this. But I just like to highlight that this is one example of what a skimmer would look like. So here's another example, because most of the time people think, okay, well, the better thing to do is to just go inside, right? So here we are. I'll kind of narrate this one as we go as well. So we're in a convenience store, maybe a gas station. These three gentlemen come up and they're working together. One of them actually pulls an attendant over to distract her. The second one starts talking to the remaining attendant. And then he ultimately decides he needs something over there too. And watch the guy behind him. As soon as she steps away, he pulls the skimming device out of his bag and places it right over the top of the terminal. As you can see here, it looks almost exactly like the terminal, at least from a distance. And so it's very hard for someone else to know that that has been done. And realistically, the only way this was identified was that there was enough fraud and they were able to research back to where it may have originated from and discovered that it was at this store, which fortunately had a camera over that counter. So they were able to locate what happened and when. So again, I don't mean to just make you afraid to ever use your card, but I just like to show some examples of kind of how skimming happens, where it can happen, and so forth. So in the context of skimming, if you think about a gas station, those are often the most frequently targeted because so many people use a gas station throughout the course of a day. And a gas station's pumps are not individually monitored throughout the day. So the most likely targeted gas pump is going to be the one that's closest to the street and facing away from the main vestibule or the main store part of the gas station. The reason for that is it's the least likely to be seen or noticed when they're installing it. So you might think, okay, well, if it's facing the street, someone's going to see. But personally, when I drive by gas stations, I look to see how much does gas cost today. I'm not generally focused on what someone is doing at an individual pump. So the best thing you can do on that front is to try and use the most visible, the most easily monitored, the most monitored location. The bystander effect is real. So like the example out in the square, a lot of people just walk by, they're not really focused on what somebody else is doing. And so it's just about being vigilant and kind of being aware of where you are, what information you're using, and so forth. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about phishing. So phishing is a really common form of fraud. It's when a message is sent from a scammer via email pretending to be maybe your financial institution or maybe a company, and they're trying to get sensitive information from you, like login credentials to another site or payment details so that they can charge your card for things. They're typically going to come in the form of something that's urgent that you need to do immediately, because the longer that email sits in your inbox, the less likely it is that you're going to click on it and submit information. And then there's also going to be some sort of link for you to click on. So a couple things that we'll talk about to recognize it. Look for errors in the text. So if something is misspelled, if there's a lot of misspellings in the language, that's often a sign that there's some phishing. If there's hyperlinks or links for you to click on and go places, you can actually hover over the link and it will show you if the link that it's going to take you to matches what the email says. So in phishing attempts, oftentimes it's going to redirect you to a completely different website. And so it may appear like you're going to your financial institution's website when in fact it's taking you to a third-party impersonation site and then having you log in with your account information that they're then able to capture. Look at the sender information. Does it make sense where you're getting this from? Was it something that you were expected or that you expected to come for you? Is it something that's coming from a place that you have done business from in the past, but perhaps the sender doesn't match the senders that you've been contacted from in the past? I've even seen emails that impersonate my credit union, MSU FCU, and I've seen things come through that will show as RN SU FCU. So R and N, lowercase r, lowercase n next to each other at first glance can look like an M. And so it might look like it's legitimate, but in fact not be legitimate. So just kind of be conscious of the sender info. And then again, unexpected or unusual. So if you're getting an email about something that doesn't make sense with a relationship that you've had in the past with that company or business, if it's not how you've been communicated about similar things before, then be skeptical of it and just be conscious. The easiest thing to do is if you have questions is to go look for the phone number or email or website yourself on Google, somewhere else. Look for the information of whoever's contacting you, and then you reach out to them and get clarification that way. So a couple more similar types of things, but done through different channels, are vishing, which is done by phone, and smishing, which is done by text. So vishing is the similar type of thing. They're contacting you, impersonating somebody else, and trying to gain access to information over the phone. I'll go through a couple examples in a few minutes about of some scams that we know about that fall into that. But the main thing is, your financial institution is never going to call you and start asking you to verify your social security information or your account number. They should have that information on file. What they might do is call to inform you about some information that they discovered regarding your account, if there's an issue or an error, and they will tell you how to go about correcting that. But they're not going to call you and start asking you to verify specific information. So just be conscious of that. And then with smishing, same thing, only this is via text. If you're getting texts for things that you've never gotten texts about before, always be skeptical. Don't click on links that are included in those texts. Those links can sometimes install malware on your phone. And so it's better to just avoid those. I typically just will delete them. If I don't recognize it, if it doesn't make sense for something, I will delete it. And if it's legitimate, it's probably just going to be informational. It's probably not going to give you a link that you have to click on. All right, so let's talk about social media. So there are some risks with social media, and we'll talk about a few of them. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about what geotagging is and how that can be a risk. We'll talk about social media quizzes that are ever more prevalent, especially during a pandemic. And then we'll talk a little bit about some life events that can particularly expose someone to enhanced risk, especially when they're posting on social media about it. So geotagging, what is geotagging? It's the process of adding geographical information to various media. So that's kind of the jargon definition of it, but basically it's the idea that if I go and I travel to Florida and now I'm posting on Facebook tagging myself at specific locations throughout Florida, that's providing information that, number one, is telling someone that I'm traveling, which can pose its own risks, but number two, it tells somebody that I'm not home. So if somebody was waiting for me to not be home to be able to access, break in and access information, they now can see that I'm not home because I'm posting all over the internet where I actually am. So with regard to geotagging, you can actually, some of it is automatically saved. So you can actually turn off some of the settings that will automatically record that data and post it with you. So you can typically go into your settings, your privacy settings, select location services. You can change your camera settings because your camera will actually tend to save location data based on where you're taking photos. You can turn that off. You can set it to never record that. Typically, even on an app by app basis, you can decide whether or not that app has access to your location data. And so what's always weird to me is if I download a game for, a little like game from the App Store, a lot of times those games want access to my camera, even though they're never going to take photos. They want access to my photo library, even though there's no reason for that. They want access to my location data. Again, there's no reason for that. So just kind of be conscious about what information you're allowing to be shared with some of those other things as well. All right, social media quizzes. They're kind of the big kahuna right now. Social media quizzes are fun. However, you're sharing a lot of personal information based on your answers. So an example here, how old are you? How many surgeries have you had? How many tattoos have you had? Have you ever hit a deer? And the list goes on. Where it really starts to get into an issue is when it has things like, what's your favorite restaurant? What street did you grow up on? What was the color of your first car? If those sound familiar, that's because they're often security questions. Your hometown, how many siblings that you have. All of those different things are often security questions for different accounts that you may have. And so if you're going out and filling out these quizzes and posting them publicly, even just to your friends group, you're exposing a whole lot of information that could be used to impersonate you or access your accounts down the road. And I don't know about you, I go through and I clear out my friends lists every once in a while, but there are definitely still people who are on my friends list who I probably haven't talked to in 5 or more years. And so you just kind of never know what information you're sharing and with whom. So it's important to be cautious about filling these out, what information you're sharing. I try to avoid filling out these quizzes at all. I figure, as fun as it is, the friends who know me will have some of this information because we will have talked about it, not because I posted it online. So just kind of be aware and be conscious of that. And one thing I like to do is with my security questions, sometimes I'll make up absurd answers that don't even fit my exact situation or the truth, so that if I do happen to do something that shares that information, I'm actually not sharing my security questions, because my security questions are something that's completely different that I made up for the purpose of security. All right, and then thirdly, we'll talk here about life events. So posting about life events on social media can be an increased risk as well. It lets people know about major changes that someone then, so say you went on a vacation or you bought a new house, or maybe you ended up in the hospital, somebody who's trying to impersonate you could contact a financial institution or a company, go in somewhere and talk to them about how, oh yeah, I was in the hospital recently and that's why XYZ happened. Oh yeah, I went on a vacation, so there's probably a bunch of charges on my credit card in Florida. Oh yeah, I just bought a new house, and so I have a new home loan that's going to show up on my credit report. All of those things are information that you're potentially sharing. And that's not to say don't share any information, but these are some things that have been shown to cause upticks in identity theft and fraud, depending on how much information you're sharing, how detailed you are, where you're posting it, and who can access the information that you're posting. All right, we're going to talk through a few coronavirus specific scams. So first one we'll talk about is contact tracing. I just heard about this one yesterday. So contact tracing is something that's been going on in more states as governments are trying to basically hunt down, okay, if you've been infected and we've confirmed that you have the virus, who have you been in contact with, so that we can touch base with them, see who they may have been in contact with, and kind of backtrack to figure out how many people have actually been exposed, and can we maybe catch some of those people before they show symptoms and avoid future exposure, or get people to quarantine so that they're not spreading the virus further. The problem with the contact tracing scam is that you get thieves who, or cyber criminals who are pretending to be contact tracers. They're contacting people and they're asking a bunch of information. The main thing here is legitimate contact tracers are not going to ask for a bunch of personal information. They're going to tell you what's what. They're going to tell you why they're calling you. And then the only things that they should be asking you are people that you have come into contact with, so that they can gain more information and make sure to follow up with them. Another big one are cure or personal protection equipment scams, things being sold online fraudulently or being emailed out or over the phone trying to sell fake things that either will cure you from this disease, there is no cure currently, or will provide you personal protective equipment that can prevent you from getting the virus. Always double check your sources. This was one that my grandpa got hit with, that he spent some money on some equipment he thought was personal protection, and he ended up getting nothing. But he had already submitted his payment information, and so it ended up being part of the fraud scheme. Fake charities, those pop up all the time, but now more than ever, pretending to be a business in need and asking for your money. Make sure that you trust the source where you're actually sending your money. If you want to give money, maybe even go directly to the charity's website. Make sure it's one that you know and trust. Stimulus scams. So this happens a lot now, where people will call or email impersonating the IRS, saying we just need to collect some more information and we can either give you a bigger check or we can fast track your delivery of funds. Though that's not legitimate and it's not going to happen that way. So your best source of information is to go directly to the IRS website and only trust information that's posted on there. And then census scams, as we continue through the season of census information being submitted, the people from the census are not going to call you and start asking questions. They're not going to ask you for your social security number. You can actually go to the census website if you search Census 2020 and see what questions are going to be asked, so that you know if someone's asking information outside of that, that it's not legitimate. An interesting fact, and I actually just saw a higher number yesterday, but I haven't vetted the source of that, but my most recent source showed that already $13.4 million has been lost by Americans in 2020 due to coronavirus related scams. So that's quite a bit of money. A few more that I'll talk about. I won't go into too much detail. Home buying and renting. So make sure if you're in the process of buying a home or planning to, if you're in the process of renting an apartment or planning to, that you're actually feel confident with where it is that you're looking. Go even if you can't go view the place inside right now, drive by, make sure that the property exists, make sure the property is actually for sale. Double check and just kind of do your research. Research the company that's providing, that's going through the sale, executing the sale. Double check with Zillow and things like that to make sure that everything seems legitimate. We've actually seen people at the credit union who've gone to buy a house in another state and they were all set to wire money, but someone at the credit union, it didn't feel right. They did a little bit of research and actually found it to be fraudulent. So the worst thing that could happen, and you really don't want to do this, is send tens or $20,000, $10,000 or more, we'll say, to buy a house only to find that the house is not actually legitimate. So just kind of be a little bit careful with that. Scam lenders, so this would come by phishing, vishing, any of those sources that are basically trying to say, hey, we can get you a low interest rate loan to help out with things. If you don't know the company, haven't had a relationship with the company before, it may be a scam. And your best bet, even if it is a company you've had a relationship with before, is to go to their website and explore the options on their site. Maybe call them instead of relying on what's in an email or coming to you via phone. Stock scams. So this one, not as many people are getting hit by this, but this is where false information would be shared that perhaps a company is producing a bunch of personal protection equipment. And so all of a sudden, a bunch of people go out and buy shares of that stock, which causes the value to go up. And then the scammers who've spread that false information, they go ahead and they sell their shares of stock because they've now seen an increase in value. And they do that before the truth comes out and the value of the stock collapses again. And then the last one I'll talk about here, unemployment insurance scams. So similar to all of these other ones I've talked about, it would come in the form of someone pretending to impersonate the unemployment office by phone, by email, and asking for information in order to complete your benefits, so that you're getting that money. Just always be conscious about what information you're providing over the phone, what you're providing over email, and what makes sense. And again, if it doesn't make sense, doesn't feel right, contact the company or the government, wherever you are supposedly being contacted from. Look up their information, contact them directly, and ask questions. One of the surest signs that you're in the process of being scammed is an extreme sense of urgency or perhaps threats about the timing of when you need to get something done. That is almost always an indicator that there's some sort of scam going on. People at legitimate companies and businesses don't get upset when you ask more questions or want more information. All right, a few more things we'll talk about briefly here. Phone security. So related to your Wi-Fi, just know if you're connecting your phone to different Wi-Fis, know where you're connecting to. Be aware of what you're sharing when you're on public Wi-Fi. Even if you're at a business and they have Wi-Fi, it's always good to ask what their specific Wi-Fi name is, because there are thieves who will go into Starbucks and they will create a Wi-Fi called S-Bucks Guest. And so that might seem legitimate when in fact that's probably not what the actual Starbucks Guest Wi-Fi is. And as soon as you connect to someone else's Wi-Fi, that can potentially expose all of the information on your phone. So just be cautious about that and what you're exposing. Make sure that your phone and any apps that you have are updated regularly. Usually updates are security fixes or come with security fixes based on new information for cybersecurity. So make sure that you're doing those updates promptly. And then regarding your data, recognize, I talked about this a little with geotagging, data is automatically collected on a lot of your apps. So it's important to make sure that you're aware of what data you're allowing to be collected by different apps, what data you're allowing your phone to collect and share. You know, with Google, with Facebook, with any of the sites that you use frequently, make sure that you're regularly reviewing the privacy settings, as those things can often change. All right, so just a few examples here of some of the worst ranked passwords that people have used in 2019. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The number's getting longer. QWERTY, so that's just basically the first 7 letters, or 6 rather, sorry, letters on your keyboard. The word password. Variations of numbers counting up depending on how many numbers you need. I love you is one, all ones, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, ABC 1, 2, 3, adding a 1, 2, 3 after QWERTY, doing the 1Q 2W. So that's basically just the numerical and then the letter below it, the numerical and the letter below it moving along the keyboard. The password admin. That one is the QWERTY OUIP. That's just the entire first line on your keyboard. Counting backwards, all 5s. So it kind of goes on. Number 20 looks like it might be a good password, but it's actually just the special character if you hold the shift key and then work your way along the number pad. So it would be the same as if you just did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, except it's the symbols that are attached to those keys. So when we think about passwords, it's important to choose something that's difficult and also use different passwords for different sites. So if someone gains access to one, they don't have access to several. So kind of looking at an example here, an awful password would be October 2020. A bad password would be Oct 2020 exclamation point. It's a little bit better, but still bad. And then still bad would be just alternating October 2020 with letters or uppercase, lowercase. Slightly better, Ghost Time 2020. And the reason that's slightly better is it's not necessarily as easy to guess. You'd have to think a little bit to figure out ghost time is not a regularly used phrase. But then the best would be to take the bottom one there, Ghost Candy Leaves Costumes, and alternating it out with different letters and different characters so that it's a long password and it involves multiple different elements that typically would not be thought of up here as like, oh, I might put these words in that order. So it makes it more difficult to guess. And the longer a password is also makes it more difficult. So overall, some things for prevention is monitoring all of your accounts and services. I like to have alerts on. So like I had my Netflix account hacked and I got an email immediately that there was a new login on the account, which allowed me to immediately deal with getting access back to my account before they were able to do too much in there. This is also true of your debit card or credit card history. That's the quickest way to know if somebody got a hold of your number and is starting to use it, if there's charges that aren't yours. If you're monitoring it regularly, you'll see those things quickly. Ask questions if things don't make sense. Always feel free to ask more questions. Why do you need this information? What do you need it for? How did you get my contact information, etc. Report anything that you find. So if you find out that something's fraudulent and you've taken a loss financially, always report it to either your financial institution, or in severe cases, you would want to report it to the police as well. And then think first. So again, ask questions. If something doesn't make sense, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Something that can be helpful are free credit checks. Accessing your credit report allows you to see if somebody has tried to open accounts or loans or things in your name. You can see that both by the inquiries section that will show you that your credit was accessed somewhere, but you'll also see if there are any loans or accounts that show up under your name. If any of your name or address information doesn't look correct, you can, that's sometimes a sign, and you can follow up on that. We recommend annualcreditreport.com, which is a government regulated website that provides you free access to your credit reports from Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Typically, you're able to get a report from each of the three once per year. However, in light of the coronavirus right now, there's an increase in fraud. And so they're actually allowing people to access one of each of these reports every week through April of 2021. So I encourage you to go check this out. You're not going to get a credit score with it, but the cool thing about this is if there's something wrong on one of the reports, you can actually dispute that information directly through the same system and get someone working on correcting it or finding out why there's inquiries or loans or things that don't make sense for you. Some steps for you if you are actually a victim of identity theft. Always contact your financial institution, tell them what happened, and they will have safeguards and things for you to complete to fix that. If you've taken a loss where you've actually lost money, file a police report. You can indicate, hey, I lost money, this happened to me on this date in this format, and then that also protects you if there's additional fraud. Then you can show, hey, I already went and showed that this has been a problem, and this is now a recurring problem. And it can help you with some, if you have to take something to court or deal with it in a more severe case, having that record can be helpful. Contact the credit bureaus. You can do that on their individual websites. And through the credit bureaus, you can actually put what's called a fraud alert that will put a message at the bottom of your credit report with your phone number to be contacted in the event of any new credit applications or account applications. It will indicate that you have been a victim and to be on high alert. And what's cool is if you contact one of the credit bureaus, they will actually make sure that that message is added to the other two as well. Another option is what's called a credit freeze. That you have to do with each individual credit bureau, but it allows you to basically put a locked door between your credit information and anything, any new applications. So if someone went into a credit union in Florida and applied for, I don't know why I keep using Florida, but someone went into a credit union in Florida and tried to apply for a credit card using your information, they would not be able to access that credit report because it would be frozen. And so that's an option, and it's now actually free for you to freeze your credit with any of the three. You can unfreeze it at any time. You can even temporarily unfreeze it, for example, for a day, so that you can apply for something and it'll automatically refreeze the next day. Completed identity theft affidavit, wherever it is that you've actually taken a loss, they will have procedures for you to indicate that it was not you that did that, how much you've taken a loss, and kind of record the details behind it. And then in the event of any kind of loss, always keep records of who you called, who you talked to, what they told you as the next steps. If you filed a police report, keep a copy of that police report. All of that can be helpful down the line in helping to hopefully recoup some of your money, or at the very least prevent additional loss. And that is all that I have. I do have time for questions if anybody does have any questions. I haven't seen any come through yet. But a couple of resources that may be helpful. Financial 4.0 is a website and mobile app where you can actually view a whole host of information, including information about scams, identity theft, etc. We also have sections on credit and budgeting, etc. And then we also have a podcast called Wallet Watch. We cover all sorts of topics from financial aid to getting ready for a first job or first interview to building your credit, protecting your identity, and all sorts of stuff. So I encourage you to check that out. And since I haven't seen any questions, I'll double check. Have you seen any, Ian?
I have not, but if anybody does have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us either through the Facebook, or you can email myself, Ian, Unger, UNGER, at goaffirmations.org, and I can forward those along to other Ian on the call so that we can get those questions answered for you. And This will still be available for folks to watch if there was information that they want to go back on.
Perfect. And then our email would be financialeducation@msufcu.org. So you can also feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Yeah, great. And thank you, Ian, for being here and doing this.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right.